Okay, this is the video for topic 2.1, the Mongols and the making of the modern world. And for the Mongol topic, we're going to make two videos. This first one is focusing on how they caused the growth of Afro Eurasian trade. So, when we focus in on the unit, the overall question that we're answering through our journey through this is what is causing the growth of the Afro Eurasian networks of exchange from 1200 to 1450? And what were the economic, cultural, technological, biological effects did it have? Blah, that's a big question. So, this is the world that we're focusing on. And really, what we're doing is we're dropping back into the global tapestry and we're essentially seeing how they reacted. We're seeing how the states that they built during this time and the Mongols, how they promoted and interacted along trade routes such as the Silk Road, the Indian Ocean system, and the Trans Sahara system. And what were the big effects of this? You know, what was the big economic exchanges? Where do we see culture diffusing to? Where do we see technology being developed? And where do we see technology being diffused to? And then finally, most importantly, where is that biological diffusion? So, our thesis for the unit is that exchanges over the Afro Eurasian networks of exchange grew after 1200 due to the rise of land empires and trading states, innovations in transportation and commercial technology, and the rising Western demand. This growth led to a wider and deeper economic exchange of luxury goods, diffusion of religious ideas and innovations, and the movement of plants and disease pathogens. So, everything we do in this unit is designed to prove this thesis correct. So, this focuses on the Mongols. And before I get into some specifics, I want to talk very briefly on why the Mongols were important. So, when you look at the Mongols as a whole, their empire, though the biggest in world history, was very had a very short life. You're talking about 120 years, if that they really made outside of a bow and a stirrup, no big technological advances. They developed no new religions. They wrote almost no books, no plays. They developed no new crops, no new agricultural methods. So the question is, what the heck did they do? Okay. Well, essentially, in building the world's largest land empire, as you can see how big it was through this picture, they basically built a connection. They were bridge builders. Now, bridge builders both in the literal sense, but also in the figurative sense, in that they were the state that really connected things out. So, when we talk about the main idea of the Mongols and why they're important for world history, is their main innovation was to bring existing systems of government under their control along the Silk Road. They just showed up and said, "We now rule you." This indirect rule allowed for the continuation of efficient rule with specific innovations of the use of Persian Muslims for their bureaucracy, the Yasa, and the promotion of interregional trade to ensure the flow of wealth. So, to kind of boil this down, their main innovation is when we argue that the growth of trade after 1200 was caused by state expansion, this is the state that would be the best example. Why? Because they didn't change the governments of the places that they conquered. They simply ruled them, allowing them to remain efficient, and really built up this trade through the Yasa and some other things that we're going to get into. So, specifically, we need to begin on why they expanded. And this is our main expander. This is Temujin, better known as Genghis Khan. And as you read in the chapter, he had a very bad childhood, but through not only warfare and murder and death, but also marriage and other things, Temujin was able to unify the Mongols. And at the Kurartai, the meeting of the 31 tribes, basically what happens is he's elected Genghis Khan. So the first reason why they did this is the term Genghis or Chinggis essentially means world or oceanic leader. So, one of the reasons why he went on this rampage of conquest is because he was told, you are the leader of the world. Two other factors, and I wouldn't stop and copy down all this, but I would keep these in mind, is that the Mongols actually were looking for more grassland. You're talking about a pastoral people that depended upon grassland for their horses, their sheep, and their goats to graze on. Well, what happened is the medieval warm period basically shortened the growing season for the grass, causing it to dry up, and they had to find more. Now, as they expanded, this wasn't free land. They would literally have to take this over. Secondly, they were cut off from trade. Okay, this is a group of people that had come to basically depend upon trade, but when the Chinese cut them off, they basically had to expand. So, why did they expand? Essentially, because of Temujin's mission, because of the internal factors and the external factors. So, how they expanded was their military. The Mongol warrior was an efficient horse rider who was deadly accurate with his short compound bow at a full gallop. They were designed to be efficient warriors, not wearing heavy armor, but wearing armor that would protect them in warfare. They adopted the strategies of the people that they conquered. This is a trebuchet, or also known as a catapult, that is used to break down city walls, and also ballistas. This is kind of like a gigantic crossbow. So the bottom line is this: using their army and following the Silk Roads, Temujin and later his grandchildren basically built this gigantic empire. And the reason why they were able to do it is because of their army. So when we look at the size of it, it was built. So now we kind of got to get into our main focus, which is how do they cause the expansion or the growth of trade? So when you take notes, I want you to make sure you can answer this question. How did the rise of the Mongol Canaanites influence the Afro-Eurasian networks of communication and exchange after 1200? So, the bottom line answer, our thesis or our claim in this question, is the rise of the Mongol Canaanites influenced the Afro Eurasian networks of communication and exchange to grow in both volume and size, while ensuring trade and safety through policies and innovations. So, because of their expansion and because of their policies and innovations, we have this gigantic safe zone. So as a result, we have great economic exchanges. People were safe. And when people move, they bring culture, they bring technology, and they bring biologic items with them. So this is what we're arguing through this. This time period is known as the Pax Mongolica or the Mongol Peace. And essentially, when you talk about the first part of the question, their empire was gigantic. So they owned literally 90% of the Silk Road that they protected, that they ruled, that they dictated policy. And so this common policy leads to a lot of safety, which leads to a lot of exchange. The other thing is that when they expanded into Russia and other areas, they're bringing new people inside of this trade route. So as we look at this, they're actually adding a whole northern part of the Silk Road. So when we talk about policies, we're talking about things that the government did that promoted trade. And the first one was the Yasa, or the legal code. The legal code basically promoted free trade. Okay. Another thing that they did is they also forbid the taxing of trade. This was the code of law. So the bottom line attitude of the Canaanite governments was to promote trade. Next, when they got into the local areas, they promoted production. This is an example of how the Chinese used water power and technology to produce the luxury goods, in this case, iron, to trade. So, this proto industrialization that we're seeing in China under the Song really took off during the Mongol rule under the Yuan and essentially made this thing explode even further. Again, that was a government policy. The other thing is that they did continue to allow the local leaders to regulate and monitor trade. Just because the Mongols were in charge now didn't mean there was any change in how trade took place. So flying money continues. The Islamic financial instruments, they continued. And so the Mongol policies was just basically to do everything that they could to make trade go. When we get to innovations, these are things that made trade more efficient. So the first one's going to be the YAM system. And the YAM system is a combination Pony Express that you read about, but it's also a military based system. Every 20 to 25 miles along the Silk Road, along the trade routes that you saw that the Mongols controlled, there was a Mongol military presence. And so this cut down on the banditry, the robbing, the violence along the Silk Road and made it very safe. Additionally, okay, they developed what's known as the passia. The passia was a passport. This basically put the merchants at a big privileged position and allowed them to really trade freely. It didn't matter whether you're Islamic, if you were Buddhist, if you were even Christian, if you had one of these, you could trade freely on the Silk Road. And finally, they allowed for business organizations, the Ortgoths. This is where people, in this case, Song Chinese, but it could be Muslims, they pool their money together and pay for and run a caravan company, which is taking things along the Silk Road. So when we look at our question, our main question we need to answer here, how did the rise of the Mongol Canaanites influence the Afro-Eurasian networks of communication and exchange after 1200? Essentially, this is known as the period of the Pax Mongolica. So it was a combination of expansion. The size of their empire brought in new people and protected a majority of the Silk Road. They developed policies for free trade under the Yasa and promoted proto industrialization and other forms of production. And they also developed innovations for efficient trade. Examples would be the YAM system, okay, the Passia, and the Ortgoth. Okay, so this is the end of the first part. In part two, we're going to talk about the significance of the Mongols.